"Why aren't you scared, human?" His answer. The cat alien warrior Breathless. Kieran breathes slowly, eyes scanning the frozen ridge as the wind whips ice crystals across the jagged stone. A flash of movement draws his attention. A figure, cloaked in black with impossibly sleek lines, silhouetted by the stark backdrop of distant mountains. Her cat-like ears twitch with predatory interest, her tail curling behind her in a gesture that borders on mocking. He keeps his pulse steady, finger hovering near the trigger of his sidearm, refusing to blink. She stands there studying him, neither flinching nor showing any outward sign of fear. Then the alien's lips curl, and she almost purrs with amusement before speaking. "On your knees, human, unless you want to die kneeling in your own blood." She doesn't shout. Her voice carries in that eerie, vibrating way that resonates in the pit of his chest. Kieran doesn't move, his jaw tightening. The air feels like it's charged with static, attention coiled and ready to spring. Finally he answers with a ragged breath, words clipped. "You'll have to make me." They stand at an impasse. Savariel, her name is whispered among outpost soldiers, usually in hushed, fearful tones, flexes her claws, which are dark as obsidian against her pale weapon. Kieran can see every muscle under her midnight attire, and it's not entirely his training that makes him hyper-aware. Her body language is lithe, yet poised for violence, and there's a subtle shift in temperature around her, as though her skin is reading his every micro-reaction. He doesn't even realize he's holding his breath until the sting of frost hits his lungs, forcing him to exhale a white plume. When she moves at last, it's fast enough that most men would flinch, but Kieran remains steady. He's known for that. An eerie composure that unsettles both ally and enemy. "I've heard stories about you." Her words glide between them. "You can't be as calm as you seem." An almost taunting tilt to her head. "Or did they condition you to show no fear? I wonder how you taste when you're trembling." Her gaze skims over him, and Kieran's muscles twitch under his heavy coat, though he sets his face into a mask of control. "I'm disappointed," she continues, circling him just out of arm's reach. "Your kind trembles so easily, yet here you stand." He hates the flicker in his chest, a response that's more than just battle readiness. There's a tug, something intangible, that he can't fully name. But her posture, the way she shifts weight from one foot to the other, stirs a primal corner of his mind. Even so, he keeps his voice cold. "You're not the first alien to threaten me, and you won't be the last." His words earn him a feral grin. She stops, tail flicking once. "Big talk. Let's see if that spine of yours holds when we bleed together." Suddenly, the whine of approaching hovercrafts cuts through the silence. Kieran flicks a quick glance at the horizon. Crimson-streaked vehicles crest a ridge, their gun barrels sweeping the terrain. Sava's ears flatten slightly, an almost imperceptible shift that reveals her annoyance. A half-dozen troopers in black exosuits leap from the craft, rifles snapping into a ready stance. Kieran curses under his breath, recognizing the crest on their shoulders. These are the private enforcers of the man he's been hunting, Jakaran. Holt, a warlord responsible for the slaughter of entire colonies on the frontier. Kieran's vendetta is personal, but explaining that to an alien warrior is the least of his concerns right now. "Out of my way," she hisses, tensing to pounce. Kieran smirks, checks the ammo in his sidearm. "Or we can both keep breathing and deal with them first." In an instant, they share a look, sizing up whether to combine forces or tear each other apart. The approaching troopers don't leave much room for debate. Sava lunges, not at him, but straight toward the nearest enforcer. Kieran can't help but admire her speed, the impossible bend of her limbs as she twists under the trooper's rifle. He fires off 3 quick shots, taking out 2 of them from behind. Sava spins, leaps onto the last man's shoulders, and with a snap of her wrist, the trooper is down. She lands softly, turning to face him again. Out of breath, Kieran lowers his weapon. They stand amid fresh corpses, steam rising from the bodies where warm blood meets frigid air. She tilts her head, lips parted. A silent moment of tension passes. Then she steps closer, as if drawn by the heat of his body in the cold. He can almost feel the hum of her presence vibrating the air. "You took advantage of my distraction," she says. Not quite accusation, not quite praise. "Saved your life," he mutters, deadpan. Her grin sharpens. "Or you saved your own, human. Don't flatter yourself." They glance at each other, then back at the ridge. More hovercrafts in the distance. It's clear both are pinned between an encroaching Army. We can leave it at that, Kieran says, reloading. We go our separate ways. You do whatever alien warrior routine you're doing and I handle mine. She lets out a soft, predatory laugh that sets something in his gut quivering. Cute. But I think you'll be more fun alive. And we're not done until I decide so. He grimaces, but with the approach of more enforcers, there's little time for ego or pride. A silent agreement passes between them. They move together across the icy terrain, forced into partnership by immediate necessity. Her steps are near, silent, cat-like, but he can still sense her movement. She's always in his peripheral, a dark shape slicing through the swirling snow. He wonders, briefly, if her kind is used to this climate. Her bare shoulders and arms, though painted in some kind of black bodysuit, suggest she should be freezing. Yet she moves as though the cold is an afterthought. They press on, forced to navigate through a labyrinth of ravines and sharp, rocky outcrops, each step an opportunity for an ambush. The swirl of adrenaline keeps them tense, scanning for threats. Kieran leads at times, relying on his knowledge of these passes. Sava occasionally grabs his shoulder or arm, steering him away from a hidden tripwire or pointing out shifting shadows. They don't exchange thanks or courtesies. Everything about them is a standoff, every moment a test. He can sense her eyes on him whenever he's focusing ahead, as though she's silently evaluating whether to slice his throat or stand at his back. The tension is electric when they reach an abandoned border post, old walls half buried in snow. Inside the crumbling structure, they find a respite from the biting wind. Kieran checks the ancient systems, but there's no power. Sava inspects. A damaged console, her tail flicking in mild frustration. Still useless, she mutters. We can't radio for anything in this scrap heap. Kieran keeps watch near a narrow window. Better than being out there, he replies. She moves behind him, lithe footsteps silent until she's close enough that he can feel the warmth of her body. He wonders if she does it deliberately, testing him. Who do you work for? She demands. Her tone is harsh, but there's a whisper of curiosity laced beneath it. Kieran's jaw sets. I work for no one, not anymore. The flicker of suspicion in her eyes is obvious. Everyone serves someone, she hisses softly. It's only a matter of who holds the leash. He gives her a sidelong glance. And who holds yours? She turns away, tail swishing. I don't wear leashes. They settle into an uneasy truce. The bodies of the troopers they left behind might have trackers, or the others might pick up the trail. Neither can afford to rest for long, but they need to wait out the search. Hours pass in tense silence, broken only by the whistling wind. Kieran busies himself by checking the perimeter, certain that if she wanted to kill him, she'd have done it already. She remains near the console, occasionally tapping at the inert keys as if expecting them to spark back to life. Her posture never fully relaxes, shoulders taut as though anticipating an imminent fight. He remembers the moment he realized that war is never truly paused, just delayed. Across the galaxy, men like Holt profit from chaos, orchestrating violence to bolster their power. Kieran's personal stake lies in a small colony raised without mercy, children included by Holt's command. That memory of scorched earth keeps him awake at night. Sava draws him back to the present, her voice low. You're hunting someone. I can see it in your eyes. That kind of obsession leaves a mark. When he doesn't respond, she presses. Don't deny it. He sets his jaw, giving a slight nod. I want him dead. Not much else to it. She steps closer, the slightest smirk forming. Who is he? Kieran's eyes flick away. Holt, another warlord who'll stop at nothing. To feed his greed. He's got advanced weaponry, unending resources, and a personal guard that hunts me wherever I go. Sava's pupils dilate at the name. I've heard rumors he's offered a king's ransom for your capture. Something about wanting your head on a spike. Kieran scoffs. That's fine, I plan to return the favor. Her lips pull back in a slight snarl, as though testing how far she can goad him. But for once, she doesn't push. Instead, she waves a dismissive hand at the battered console. This wasteland belongs to the highest bidder. Someone like Holt will find us both if we linger. Kieran snorts. And yet here we are. She flicks her tail in irritation. I can leave you to fend for yourself if that's what you prefer. His voice is flat, sardonic. If you knew the things I've survived, you'd realize that's not a threat. They stiffen, exchanging the kind of glance that could erupt into violence or something else entirely. But outside, the howl of engines interrupts again. More hovercrafts. They share a quick look, the tension of mutual distrust overshadowed by survival. Kieran creeps to the window, scanning the darkness. They're searching systematically. We can't stay. Sava steps up behind him, her breath hot against the back of his neck. You say you don't fear me, she whispers, but do you fear them? He allows himself a grim chuckle. I fear wasting ammunition on incompetent soldiers, he says. She arches a brow, clearly amused. A braver man than most, but still a fool. Despite the barbed words, there's a flicker in her tone that almost borders on respect. They gather what scant supplies they can from the abandoned outpost, torn, blankets, a few rusted rations, and a single mechanical tool that might help them break a lock or pry open a sealed hatch. Then they slip into the freezing dusk. An hour later, they find themselves in a narrow canyon where the walls tower overhead. The wind slices through with a shrieking wail. Kieran takes the lead, scanning for tripwires or hidden turrets while Sava covers the rear. The further they go, the more they realize the canyon is a dead end. High walls slick with ice, no obvious routes up. They turn to head back, only to find 3 black-armored enforcers blocking their exit, rifles raised. One's mouth curls into a grin beneath his visor. Drop your weapons. Kieran glances sideways at Sava. She is rigid, fury sparking in her eyes. The lead trooper steps forward. Holt wants the man alive, the alien he didn't specify. Kieran can feel her bristling. The trooper aims at her chest. Don't make it difficult. Kieran tenses, about to fire, but Sava explodes into motion. She's on them before they can pull the trigger, her body contorting in ways that seem impossible, claws slicing through polymer armor. 2 collapse in a spray of scarlet. The last tries to raise his weapon, but Kieran is already there, plunging a knife into the chink in the trooper's armor. The man drops heavily. The echoes of the scuffle fade into the canyon. They stand. Over the corpses, breathing hard. Blood steams against the ice, and for a moment neither moves. Sava's chest rises and falls, a faint tremor coursing along her shoulders. Kieran's gaze drops to her slender frame, noticing the rapid flicker of her tail. She glances up, meeting his stare. You fight well, she acknowledges, voice throaty. Likewise, he concedes. He steps past her, kneels to inspect the trooper's gear, searching for clues. They have to be working off a homing signal or an orbital feed. They're always too close. Sava folds her arms. We need to end this, she says. Both of us have enemies at our heels, and I have no interest in letting them pick us off one by one. There is no warmth in the statement, but an unspoken logic. They stand a better chance together. Kieran stands, feeling her eyes roam across him. This time, it's not just calculating. There's an undercurrent of something else, a spark that disconcerts him more than any threat. He forces himself to focus. You must have a way off this planet, he says, one that's not riddled with Holt's men, or do you just wander these wastes for the sport of it? She narrows her eyes. My craft was shot down 2 nights ago. I've been stranded here. If you think I'm drifting by choice, you're the fool. His mind churns. A half-buried outpost, multiple squads of enforcers, an alien warrior who might slice his throat if given a reason. He needs to find Holt's stronghold and end this. She likely wants off-world. Their paths intersect at the necessity of survival. Fine, he says. We do this together until it's over, but don't expect me to kneel. A spark of challenge flares in her expression. I prefer you standing when I take what I want, human. He clenches his jaw, ignoring the swirl in his gut. They gather ammo from the dead troopers, stowing it in pouches. Then they scramble out of the canyon using an old grappling device from one of the enforcers. Scaling the icy wall is no easy feat, but they manage, occasionally exchanging short, barked instructions. At the top, the wind is fiercer, biting at exposed skin, but they push on. The mountainous terrain is treacherous, and night is falling fast, painting the sky in violent hues of purple and black. Sava takes the lead now, her eyes apparently better suited for the darkness. He notices how she tilts her head, occasionally stopping as if listening to the wind. The black suits they looted from the troopers' packs are too large to fit her frame, so she has to make do with her original body-hugging attire. The cold has to be brutal, yet she shows no sign of weakness. They arrive at a sheer drop, overlooking their valley dotted with half-ruined structures. Smoke drifts from a large facility in the distance, a fortress-like compound bristling with guard towers and floodlights. Kieran's heart pounds. Holt is likely down there, or at least his top lieutenants. Sava crouches, scanning the perimeter. "That's where your man is?" she asks. Kieran nods. "He has to be. He's the only one with enough resources to fortify a place like that." She exhales slowly, her breath a faint plume in the cold air. "Looks like we have a war to wage." Slinking back from the edge, they find shelter beneath a jutting outcrop. There they plan. By the time they finish, the night is fully settled, and the temperature has plummeted. A small thermal device from the troopers' gear gives them enough warmth to keep from freezing, but it's not much. They huddle near it, separate but forced to share the narrow space. It's a reluctant closeness that sets every nerve on edge for both of them. Kieran can't ignore how every breath she takes stirs a strange awareness in him. She's so still, yet there's an underlying tension beneath that smooth exterior, as though she's coiled to strike. Occasionally her gaze darts to him, but she says nothing. Neither of them sleeps well. Morning brings a pallid light, and with it the necessity of approaching the fortress. They descend carefully, sticking to the shadows. The plan is to slip past guard patrols, break in through a cargo bay and sabotage the generator. Chaos is their best ally. If they manage to disrupt the fortress's power, Kieran can find Holt, or at least glean a location. Meanwhile, Sava wants to commandeer a ship from his hangar. They approach a ridge overlooking the main gate, breath puffing in the frigid air. "If we trip any alarms," she warns, "you won't make it out. Are you prepared for that?" Kieran's response is stone cold. "Death doesn't frighten me." His words bring a slight shift in her expression. It might be respect, or maybe just curiosity. Then she pulls a small sphere from a pouch, an alien device with spines radiating from its center. "If I can place this near the generator, it'll overload their system from within. You handle external security. Keep them busy." Kieran nods curtly. "Let's move." Slipping past the perimeter requires every ounce of skill they share. Kieran dispatches sentries quietly, pressing a blade to throats or strangling them from behind. Sava's movements are a lethal dance. She uses her claws, silent as a ghost. By the time they reach the massive cargo bay doors, adrenaline thrums in Kieran's veins. He sets a small charge on the lock mechanism, timed to blow, with minimal fuss. At the faint hiss of decompression, they slip inside. The corridor beyond is dimly lit, smelling of fuel and metal. Guttural voices echo from around the corner, guards making rounds. They press themselves into shadows, exchanging glances. He motions. 2 guards. She nods and ghosts forward. Before he can blink, Sava leaps, twisting mid-air to land behind them. The thud of bodies hitting the floor and a strangled gasp are all Kieran hears. She gestures for him to follow. Deeper inside, they reach an intersection. Sava points one way. "Generators that direction." "Don't let anyone raise the alarm." Kieran sets his jaw. "You'd better come back." She smirks, that predatory grin. "I don't leave unfinished business." In a flick of her tail, she's gone. Kieran breathes in, counts to 3, and sets off down the opposite corridor. The plan is simple: cause enough ruckus that the guards focus on him. He locates a security station, knocks out the first guard, and sets a timed explosion on a set of munitions crates. Alarms blare. Red lights pulse. He ducks behind a cargo loader as troopers flood in, weapons hot. Then the corridor shakes with the boom of the explosion. Smoke and flames erupt, scattering men in all directions. Drawing his sidearm, Kieran picks off 3 troopers who try to rush him. Despite the chaos, he remains unnervingly calm, his signature trait. But the numbers are overwhelming. He retreats into a side passage, blocking it with crates. Gunfire rattles, bullets ricochet. Sparks fly. He catches sight of an upper walkway that might give him a vantage point, so he scales a ladder, ignoring the burn in his muscles. Up above, he takes cover behind a steel railing, firing down at the troopers pinned by smoke below. A swirling alarm voice cuts through the din. Intruder in the generator room, lockdown in progress. Kieran smiles grimly. Sava must have reached her objective. The next seconds are a blur. A trooper lobs a flash grenade onto his catwalk, forcing him to duck. Light blooms searing. He fires blindly, feeling a bullet glance off his shoulder armor. Gritting his teeth, he rolls onto his stomach, returns fire. The trooper drops. From somewhere behind the lines, Kieran hears a familiar voice, amplified. Through the fortress speakers, Holt. He's barking orders, demanding his men kill the intruder. Something in Kieran's blood surges with rage. This is the man who orchestrated the massacre that changed Kieran's life. He braces himself, checking. The vantage. If he can just see Holt, maybe he can put a bullet in him. But there's no direct line of sight. Below, the fortress shudders. Electrical surges blow out lights. Sparks rain from overhead conduits. Sava's device must be working, overloading the systems. Kieran glances through the smoke, sees troopers scrambling as half the lights go dark. The alarm wails in stuttering intervals now. He has to move. Sliding down a support beam, he lands amid the chaos, sprinting through swirling smoke and flickering sparks. He collides with a trooper, grappling for a moment before slamming him into a wall. Another tries to tackle him from behind, but Kieran's elbow cracks the man's visor. Guns clatter, curses echo. Kieran is in the thick of it, every nerve on fire. He ducks into a side chamber to reload. The corridor lights flicker. Sava appears at the far end, panting, a smear of blood on her cheek. She holds up the alien device, now burning with an internal glow. "We have about 30 seconds before this place tears itself apart," she shouts. "We need to get to the hangar." She's right. The entire fortress vibrates, groaning under the strain of failing systems. Kieran sets his jaw. Holt is here. I won't leave without him. Her eyes flash, tail lashing. Then move fast. They bolt down another corridor. The air feels heavier, pulsing with every short circuit behind the walls. Troopers lurch out of side passages, but the pair cuts them down in a flurry of bullets and claws. There's no time to be subtle now. They burst into a wide atrium. A catwalk lines the upper edge, and at the center is a tall figure in a grey officer's coat, barking into a comm device. Holt's voice booms, "Contain them, or you're all dead men!" He whirls, eyes narrowing at Kieran's sudden appearance. Recognition flits across his face. "You!" Holt snarls, drawing a sidearm. "You're supposed to be rotting on some colony." Kieran lifts his pistol. "You took everything from me. Now I take everything from you." They fire simultaneously. Holt ducks behind a console. The bullet zings off metal. Kieran charges, ignoring the scorch of a grazing shot to his arm. He leaps over debris, tackling Holt. They crash to the floor, wrestling for control of the gun. Holt is stronger than he looks, driving a knee into Kieran's ribs. The breath explodes from Kieran's lungs. Holt pins Kieran's arm, straining to twist the pistol away. With a snarl, Kieran rams his forehead into Holt's face, knocking him off. Holt stumbles, blood streaming from his nose. Kieran pulls the trigger, but Holt lurches aside at the last second. That's when Sava appears behind Holt, blade glinting. She slashes, scoring a deep line across Holt's back. He cries out, staggering. Kieran lines up his shot. Holt sees it, tries to raise his own weapon. The fortress trembles, metal shrieking. Sparks cascade from the ceiling. Kieran fires once, twice. Holt's body jolts. Blood spatters across the console. He collapses. Alarms warble, giving way to choking black smoke as consoles overload. Kieran stands there, chest heaving, staring at the body. The moment feels so real. Sava grabs his arm. "We need to go now." He can barely tear his eyes from Holt's corpse, the vengeance he's pursued for so long finally in front of him. But the floor beneath them shakes, and Sava's urgent yank reminds him that the entire compound is about to collapse. Together they bolt for the corridor leading to the hangar. Debris rains from overhead. Pipes burst, spewing steam. Flames flicker in corners. They sprint down a corridor of chaos, the floor quaking with every step. An armored door stands at the end. Hangar access. Sava hurls a small-shaped charge onto it, yanking Kieran back. It detonates, blowing a hole wide enough to scramble through. Inside the hangar, a handful of maintenance techs scatter, terror on their faces. The place is massive, ships in various states of disrepair. Sava points to a sleek craft, with alien markings scrawled across its hull. "That's mine, move!" They race over, dodging falling beams and the panicked staff. She slams her palm onto a panel, the craft's ramp hissing open. Kieran hesitates briefly, board an alien ship with someone who might kill him the moment. They're safe, but staying here means certain death. He follows her up the ramp. The hatch seals behind them and the hum of the engines resonates through the floor. Sava leaps into the pilot's seat, flipping switches, her tail lashing in. Agitation. Outside, the hangar is collapsing in on itself. The ship lurches upward, thrusters whining. Kieran grips a support beam, sweat mingling with soot on his face. They punch through the roof, debris clanging off the hull. Then suddenly, they're soaring into the frigid open air. The fortress implodes behind them, a ball of flame that lights the morning sky. Kieran stares out a viewport, the final monument to his vendetta reduced to rubble. Holt is dead. A wave of exhaustion washes over him, though he remains upright, heart pounding. Sava adjusts controls, navigating the battered craft away from the rising plume of smoke. She flicks a glance over her shoulder. "I hope that was worth it," she says, voice breathy from exertion. He can't even speak at first, just nods, letting the moment sink in. They fly over the mountainous terrain, scanning for threats. Everything that has happened in the last day feels like a blur. Battle after battle, near death after near death. Now with Holt gone, the single driving force in Kieran's life is resolved, or so he thinks. Sava's voice crackles through the ship's comm. "This vessel needs repairs. There's a hidden station on the other side of the planet. Might be a good place to patch up." Kieran exhales, leaning against the cold metal wall. "You said that was your craft," he mutters. She glances at him. "It belonged to my people before these brigands shot us down. I reclaimed it. That's all that matters." They drift into tense silence. Kieran's mind reels at how swiftly he was pulled into her orbit. He's not sure if he should be relieved, or terrified that they're both alive and still stuck with each other. Part of him wants to bury everything in a quiet corner of memory and disappear. But as he stares at Sava, the slender lines of her form, the way her muscles move beneath her black attire, he realizes something else has taken root. He doesn't fully understand it yet, nor does he want to, but it's there, an undercurrent that's stronger than he'd like to admit. They land the ship in a secluded clearing, shielded by towering ice formations. It's not a proper station, more like a camouflaged bunker that Sava insists her race established years ago. She guides him through an entry hatch hidden under a sheet of reflective ice. The interior is dark and musty, emergency lights flickering. She taps a control pad. A generator sputters to life, bathing them in a weak yellow glow. Broken equipment litters the floor. He can see older alien technology strewn about, some sections sealed off by collapsed corridors. "Not much, but it'll keep us hidden for a while," she says flatly. They move deeper into the bunker until they find a small room that might once have been a workshop. Sava pries open a locker, rummaging for anything useful, medical supplies, spare parts. She tosses Kieran a sealed kit. "Patch yourself up. The way you fight, you'll bleed out before I can collect on your corpse." He meets her gaze, face impassive, but there's a flicker of wry amusement in his eyes. "Worried about me?" she scoffs, pulling out a set of bandages. "Just preserving a resource." Moments later, they sit in tense proximity, each tending their wounds. The day's battles left more than a few cuts and bruises on both of them. Sava's suit is torn near her shoulder, a nasty gash beneath. She grimaces while disinfecting it, but does not cry out. Kieran watches the tiny lines of her face tighten, the way her tail flicks in muted irritation. He reminds himself to stay detached, but an involuntary pang moves through him. He can't quite place if it's empathy or something else. Either way, he brushes it aside, focusing on his own injuries. She finally speaks after a while. "So now that Holt is gone, what do you plan to do?" Her tone is casual but weighted with curiosity. Kieran shrugs stiffly. Don't know. Maybe find another cause worth killing for. Her lips curl in faint distaste. Is that all you do? Spill blood for some lost cause? He meets her stare, unyielding. He destroyed my home, killed my friends, that was reason enough. Now that it's done, I haven't given the rest much thought. Silence stretches. Then she stands, rolling, her shoulder experimentally as if testing the bandage. We'll have to see if your life means anything beyond vengeance. Meanwhile, I have my own mission. She picks up a damaged console from a table. There's intel I need to get off-world. It concerns my people's next steps in this region, our alliances, our enemies. Kieran arches an eyebrow. You're welcome. You'd be in Holt's prison if not for me. She bares her teeth slightly. I'd have found my way out eventually, human. I always do. The hours pass in an uneasy alliance as they salvage parts from the bunker and repair systems aboard the ship. Sava's skill with alien technology is evident. She moves with dexterity, hooking wires, bypassing broken circuits. Kieran does what he can, though he mostly handles simpler tasks or heavy lifting. By the time the ship's basic repairs are complete, they're both exhausted and streaked with grime. A moment arrives where they're forced to crawl through a tight passage in the craft's maintenance bay to connect power couplings. The cramped space leaves them practically pressed together, breath mingling in the darkness. Sava's voice comes in hushed puffs. Don't get any ideas. Kieran can feel the heat of her body. I'm not, are you? Her tail flicks dangerously near his leg. Shut up and hand me the tool. He does. Heartbeat thudding for reasons he can't entirely blame on adrenaline. The device sparks, lighting the narrow crawl space for a moment. Her features are illuminated, eyes catching the flicker, dangerously intense. He can almost feel her alien physiology, some primal magnetism that sets his nerves on edge. They manage to restore partial power. When they emerge, sweaty and battered, there's a moment where their eyes meet in the corridor. She inhales sharply, as if tasting the air. Then she brushes past him, not speaking, leaving him unsettled. He hates how she can make him feel off balance, without even touching him. He hates it almost as much as he's intrigued by her. Outside, the bunker's gloom is thick. The generator's hum is the only sound. They convene in a small alcove near the main console to discuss their next move. Sava is stoic, arms folded. Kieran leans against a wall, arms crossing his chest. We can't stay forever, he says. Holt's men may still be looking for me, though I doubt they'll be as motivated now that he's dead. But your people might be searching for you too. Her tail gives a slow, languid curl. Perhaps, she admits. Or they might think, I'm dead. Either way, I won't be grounded on this rock. We'll launch once we've got enough power. He straightens. How you're leaving as soon as it's fixed? She smirks. What else did you expect, that we'd remain in these frozen wastes playing house? He bristles, but his retort gets stuck in his throat. Deep down, he knows they owe each other. Nothing, yet a part of him feels an unexplainable twist at the thought that she might vanish. Then let's finish up, he mutters. He distracts himself with work. The next few hours are spent calibrating the engines, aligning the flight, controls. Sava returns with a container of alien fuel cells she'd stashed in the bunker. Together they manage to power up the main thrusters. But the process is not without friction. Every time they disagree, it flares like an argument couched in half-suppressed tension. She calls him stubborn. He calls her reckless. Yet both realize they need each other's help. Eventually, they stand in the cockpit watching readouts stabilize. The overhead lights brighten. Life support systems activate with a whoosh of recycled air. Sava's gaze flicks to the console. We're ready, she says quietly. Kieran steps to her side. All right, let's get off this rock. She lifts a brow. Confident we can trust me to get us out alive? He tilts his head. Guess? I'm about to find out. She fires the engines. The ship rumbles, vibrating through the hull. They hover up into the frosty dawn light, leaving the bunker behind. As the craft ascends, the planet's stark landscape stretches beneath them, a testament to days of struggle. Once in the upper atmosphere, Sava glances at Kieran. If you have no plan, she says softly, I have a proposition. My people might grant you safe passage if you offer them something in return. You're a warrior. You could be useful. Kieran gives a short laugh. I'm not good at obeying orders, she smirks. Good. Neither am I. The atmosphere breaks around, them starlight cutting through the cockpit windows. Finally, they burst into the vacuum of space. Kieran stares at the swirling expanse of stars. He's free, Holt's spectre laid to rest. The question is, what now? Sava sets coordinates into the navigational system. There's a station just outside this sector. It's neutral ground, she says. If you want to part ways there, fine. If you want to come with me, that's your choice. He exhales. I'll decide when we arrive. Hours slip by in tense quiet. Sava stands checking on something in the engine room. Kieran remains in the cockpit, eyes drifting across the control panels. A beep draws his attention, an incoming message on a frequency he doesn't recognize. He answers, only to hear static-laced alien speech. Before he can decipher it, Sava re-enters. Her eyes flare. Don't touch that. He lifts his hands. Relax. It was blinking, so I looked. She approaches, pressing a sequence of buttons to silence the transmission. It's from my people, she admits, voice guarded. They want an update on my status. Kieran waits. She hesitates, almost vulnerable for the briefest moment. Then she sighs, letting the static fade to silence. I'm not ready to answer yet, she mutters. He's tempted to ask why, but something in her posture suggests she won't answer truthfully. Instead, he says nothing. Time stretches. They eat in silence, rations that are bland but sustaining. The air grows thick with unspoken tension, each aware that something unresolved simmers between them, part curiosity, part rivalry, part attraction. Kieran polishes a weapon by the overhead lights, occasionally glancing at Sava as she tinkers with a console. She catches his stare once, her lips curving into a half-smile as if to say, I know what you're thinking, and he quickly looks away. Suddenly the ship lurches, alarms blaring. Sava curses, rushing to the pilot's seat. What the... Kieran starts, but she's already scanning readouts. We have an energy spike in the starboard thruster. Something must have fused incorrectly. The craft veers, forcing them to wrestle with controls. Through the viewport, Kieran sees a swirl of cosmic debris and the faint glow of a distant star. We can't hold course, Sava growls. Brace yourself. The ship spirals, caught in a gravitational eddy from a nearby planetary fragment. They manage to stabilize, but the stress on the hull is immense. Warning lights flash everywhere. We have to set down, Sava grits out, glancing at navigational data. There's a planetoid with a semi-breathable atmosphere not far. We can't fix this in vacuum. Kieran clenches his jaw. So do it. They break orbit, careening toward a small, barren planet that appears on the scanners. The landing is rough, thrusters sputtering. When they finally settle in a swirl of dust, the engines cut out, leaving them in near silence save for the ominous ticking of cooling metal. Sava stands and storms out of the cockpit, muttering curses in her language. Kieran follows, annoyance prickling. Is this your idea of safe travel? She whips around. You want to handle the meltdown in the thrusters? He bites back a retort, inhaling sharply. Let's just fix it. I've had enough crashes for one lifetime. She tosses him a toolkit, her gaze steely. Then don't stand there complaining. The thruster couplings are accessible from underneath. Get moving. He wants to snarl back, but he stomps past her instead, stepping onto the planet's dusty surface. Outside, the air is thin but breathable. The sky is a sickly orange and the terrain is cracked, lifeless. A searing wind kicks up grit. Kieran climbs under the starboard side, looking for the damaged couplings. Sava moves along the top panel, checking external plating. The wind howls. Occasionally they shout instructions to each other. Time drags on, the relentless environment wearing on them. At one point they meet at the ship's open hatch, both sweaty and coated in dust. This place is worse than the last planet, Kieran mutters. It's stable enough for repairs, Sava snaps back. Stop whining. Their eyes lock, annoyance boiling over. Something in them both cracks. He steps closer, his voice going low. You don't get to tell me what to do. She lifts her chin defiantly, her tail lashing behind her. I just did, human. You going to fight me over it? An electric tension flares between them. Each breath they take seems to charge the air. Their standoff is cut short by a violent gust of wind that slams into the hull, nearly toppling Kieran. Sava grabs his arm, stabilizing him. The contact lingers a second too long. Her fingers are warm, and despite the swirling dust, he feels that same strange pull. She suddenly snatches her hand away as if burned, turning aside with a hiss of annoyance. "Focus," she growls and stalks off. He stands there unsettled by the jolt that coursed through him at her touch. They work through the next hours in a strained silence, each pushing down that undercurrent of attraction. By the time they manage to patch the thruster couplings, both are exhausted. The wind has died down, leaving a hazy dusk that settles over the cracked horizon. Kieran hauls himself onto a piece of hull plating to rest, taking a long drink from his canteen. Sava joins him, seat turned away slightly, eyes scanning the horizon for potential threats. Eventually, he speaks, voice softer than before. "We make a hell of a team when we aren't at each other's throats." She snorts. "You say that like it's a virtue." Silence lapses again, but less tense. Without turning, she continues, "I've never met a human quite like you. Most of your kind stinks of fear, or arrogance, or both. You—" She trails off, letting the rest hang. Kieran watches her silhouette against the orange sky, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. "You're different too," he admits. "I've fought plenty of aliens, but none like you. The others didn't. They weren't like this." She almost smirks, but her lips don't fully curve. "My people value strength above all. Weakness is a sin to us. We were bred for war. Sometimes I think we forget how to be anything else." Kieran tilts his head. "Maybe that's why we keep clashing. Two warriors who only know how to fight." She turns fully now, meeting his gaze. Something passes between them, an acknowledgement of a tension that's been building since that first confrontation on the ridge. It's as if they're both realizing there's no easy escape from it. Neither speaks for a moment. The hush is thick enough to taste. Finally she moves, swinging her legs around so they dangle off the hull's edge, facing him. "We should test the thrusters," she says quietly, "before nightfall." But she doesn't stand. Kieran doesn't either. Their eyes remain locked. The battered sky overhead crackles with distant lightning, reflecting in her feline pupils. He senses that same primal magnetism, unspoken. Slowly, almost tentatively, he reaches out a hand toward her. She stiffens but doesn't pull away. Just as his fingers brush her forearm, a sudden quake rattles the ground. The moment snaps. A deep rumble rolls under their feet. They both jump up, scanning for the source. The planet's crust shifts, a jagged fissure splitting the ground not far from the ship. Dust erupts and the ship groans as the ground beneath it trembles. "We need to lift off," Sava snarls, bounding toward the hatch. Kieran scrambles after, the half-formed moment of vulnerability lost to the eruption of danger. Inside they fire up the engines. The patched thruster complains, but it ignites. The ground quake intensifies, sending shockwaves across the land. Slowly, painfully, the ship ascends, shaking violently. Alarms beep, but they remain airborne. Sava fights the controls, teeth bared. Kieran grips a handhold, adrenaline pounding. With a final shudder, they clear the roiling clouds of dust. The planet's surface cracks and folds below them like some ancient beast stirring. Once they break the upper atmosphere, the ship stabilizes. Sava breathes heavily, wiping sweat from her temple. Kieran exhales, forcing himself to relax. "I take back what I said," he mutters. "This definitely isn't safer." She gives a short laugh, her eyes flicking to him. "Feel alive?" He shakes his head, a wry grin tugging at his lips. "Too alive." They plot a course again toward the neutral station. The trip is smoother this time, the patched thruster, holding. Periodically, Sava checks the navigation, while Kieran scans sensors for potential threats. With no immediate crisis, the ship feels smaller, tension building between them once more. At one point, she steps behind him at the console, leaning in to read data over his shoulder. Her breath warms the back of his neck. He tries to focus on the screen, but the closeness is distracting in ways he can't fully deny. She notes his tension, letting her tail flick across his thigh. He jolts slightly at the unexpected contact. She smirks, an almost predatory gleam in her eyes. "You're easier to read than you think," she purrs, stepping away. He tries not to dwell on the quick surge of heat he felt at that light touch. A day passes in the quiet hum of space travel. They take turns resting in a cramped bunk area, neither fully comfortable sharing a space. The forced proximity only heightens their awareness of each other. The minimal boundaries, each time one of them shifts in sleep, the other is acutely aware. Every brush of arms, every accidental bump in the corridor is charged with potential. Yet neither acts on it, as if waiting for the other to show a crack in their armor. Finally, the sensor alert pings. The neutral station drifts into view, a large ring structure orbiting a dull grey planet. The comm crackles with docking instructions. Sava transmits some alien clearance codes, and they guide the ship into a docking bay. The station interior is labyrinthine, a chaotic marketplace of various species. Sava leads the way, tail swaying, posture commanding. Kieran trails behind, scanning the crowds for threats. He's aware that here, among so many aliens, he's the minority. Some stare at him. Others quickly look away, unsettled by his intense gaze. They find a repair vendor, a wiry amphibious alien who eyes them warily. Sava negotiates in a guttural language, eventually arranging for additional repairs and fuel. The vendor demands payment. She hands over a small crystal data drive. "Encoded. Intel," she says curtly. "Worth more than your life." The alien snatches it greedily, eyeing them with suspicion. Kieran observes from the side, arms folded. He notices how even in a crowded station, people give Sava a wide berth. There's something undeniably dangerous about her aura, like a predator among unsuspecting prey. Finishing the transaction, she beckons him to follow. "We have a few hours until they finish. Let's find somewhere less exposed." They locate a small, dimly lit lounge in the station's labyrinth of corridors. The place is half empty. Only a few tables occupied by shady figures. A single overhead lamp casts flickering shadows across tarnished metal walls. They sit in a corner booth, facing the entrance. Kieran orders a stiff drink from a bored-looking bartender. Sava orders something that comes in a tall, steaming vessel with a pungent scent. For a while they nurse their drinks, each lost in the swirl of overlapping music and hushed conversations. Kieran breaks the silence. "You really think people will greet me with open arms?" She raises an eyebrow. "I think they'll greet you with caution, but if you prove yourself a capable ally, they won't kill you. Probably." He takes a slow sip, letting the alcohol burn down his throat. "And you? Where do you stand in that equation?" Her tail flicks under the table. "I'm not a diplomat, human. I'm a warrior. I do what's necessary." He sets his drink down, leaning forward. "And what if I don't want to be someone's hired gun anymore? What if I've had enough fighting?" She holds his gaze. "Is that truly what you want?" He opens his mouth to respond, but hesitates. The truth is, after years of revenge-fueled combat, he's never really considered what he wants next. Her eyes narrow and she almost smiles, as if sensing his confusion. "Some battles don't end with a single kill," she murmurs. "They leave echoes." Her words strike deeper than he's willing to admit. He looks away, fiddling with his empty glass. "I guess time will tell." There's a subtle shift in the atmosphere then, a moment of shared understanding. When she leans closer, he can smell the faint, intriguing scent of her. It's different from any human perfume. Spicier, alien. It makes his head spin a little. She reaches out, brushes a fingertip across the back of his hand, an intentional testing gesture. He looks up sharply, heart thudding. She doesn't speak, but the question in her eyes is clear. "Are you afraid of me?" He doesn't answer in words. Instead, he allows that touch to remain, not pulling away. The air feels thick. A server glides by, depositing another round of drinks, oblivious to the tension simmering between them. Sava's lips part slightly, her breath barely audible. Kieran swallows hard, the flickering station lights reflecting in his eyes. For a moment, it seems like the rest of the universe fades, leaving just the two of them locked in a silent standoff. That's equal parts challenge and surrender. Before either can speak, a loud crash at the bar draws their attention. A pair of hulking brutes are in a heated argument, alien curses flying. One shoves the other, sending him stumbling into a table. Glass shatters. Immediately the lounge patrons scramble for distance. Security is lax here, bar fights are likely common. Kieran tenses, hand drifting toward his weapon. Sava stands, her feline grace poised for a fight. But the brawlers remain, at the bar, ignoring them. A glance passes between Kieran and Sava. Both realize the moment they were on the brink of is gone. She exhales slowly, tail flicking in mild frustration. "Let's find somewhere quieter." He nods. They leave the lounge, weaving through the bustling corridors until they locate a quieter hallway near the docking bays. There, the hum of the station's life support and distant thrumming machinery envelops them. Sava stops near a sealed viewport, the faint glow of distant starlight illuminating her features. Kieran stops beside her, arms hanging at his sides. She faces him fully now, and there's no bar fight, no audience, no immediate danger. Her hand lifts to trace the collar of his shirt, a surprisingly gentle touch for someone so deadly. He feels his pulse quicken, that primal awareness turning into a roaring in his ears. "I don't feel safe here," she says, voice low, though he senses she's not talking about the station. "Neither do I," he admits, stepping closer until they're almost chest to chest. Her gaze flicks over his face, as though searching for any sign of weakness. He wonders briefly if she'll mock him, or if he'll push her away. Instead, his hand comes to rest on her hip, tentative yet firm. Her breath catches. The charged undercurrent that's been building between them spikes. For a split second, neither moves, suspended in the electric hush. Then, as if on an unspoken signal, they crash together. It's not soft or tender. There's a desperation to the way their mouths meet, a raw hunger neither can hold back. Her hands grip his shoulders, pulling him closer. He backs her against the cool metal wall, heart hammering. She nips his lower lip, a low growl vibrating in her throat, and he responds by tightening his grip at her waist, pressing against her warmth. This is the collision they've been building toward, a violent melding of lips and teeth and breath that feels half like combat. She twists, reversing their positions, slamming him to the wall instead, her claws scraping lightly at his neck. He groans, part pain, part desire, capturing her mouth again in a clash of tongues. The station's fluorescent hum fades. They're lost in this moment. It's more than just lust. It's an exorcism of tension, the only language they share, for all that's unspoken. When they finally break apart, gasping, her eyes are bright with a mix of triumph and surprise. They remain tangled for several pounding heartbeats, her forehead resting against his. "You fight like you kiss," she whispers, a teasing edge in her tone. "And you claw like you're trying to take a trophy," he retorts breathlessly. She smirks, nuzzling closer. "Maybe I am." He exhales, letting the adrenaline subside just enough to speak coherently. "We should get back to the ship soon," he manages, though the suggestion is half-hearted. She nods, stepping away, but not too far. They make their way back through the corridors side by side. The hustle of the station now feels different. The tension between them lingers, simmering beneath the surface. By the time they return to their craft, the repairs are near complete. The amphibious vendor greets them, croaking that they're lucky he works so fast. Sava tosses him a final data token, and they board the ship once again. Within the enclosed cockpit, that charged silence returns. She sets new coordinates, presumably for her people's territory. He straps into the co-pilot's seat, heart still hammering with residual heat from their encounter. The engines fire up. As they launch from the station, neither speaks. The unspoken question hangs in the air. What happens now? They jump to FTL, the stars streaking into lines. The hum of the drive envelops them. Once stabilized, Kieran stands. The proximity of the cockpit suddenly too cramped. He moves to the corridor, leaning against the bulkhead. Sava follows, her footsteps soft. Her tail curves around her legs. She stops in front of him, crossing her arms. "You can't pretend that didn't happen," she states bluntly. He tries for a wry smile. "I'm not. Just figuring out what it means." She shrugs, posture coiled. "We're alive. We desire each other. For now, that's enough. He studies her face, sees the flicker of vulnerability that she tries so hard to mask. With a rough sigh, he nods. Fine. Their closeness charges the air again. This time the kiss is slower but no less intense. He tangles his fingers in her hair, feeling the softness. She presses closer, until they're lost in each other, once more. Eventually they break apart, breathing hard. She rests her cheek against his shoulder for a moment, eyes closed. He wraps an arm around her waist, not entirely believing the moment is real. They remain like that until a sudden beep from the cockpit signals the end of FTL. Sava reluctantly pulls away, a half smile tugging at her lips. Duty calls, she murmurs. Kieran nods, swallowing. Back to the pilot's seat, she drops them, out of hyperspace near a swirling blue-green planet, ringed by crystalline debris. He stands behind her, hands braced on the back of her chair. The sensor display shows multiple ships in orbit, each bearing a faint signature similar to Sava's vessel. Home? He asks quietly. She nods, tension returning to her shoulders. One of our outposts, likely guarded. They won't fire on me if I transmit the correct codes, but they'll question a human on board. He remains silent, letting her work. She sends a series of rapid signals, the alien language scrawling across the console. A voice crackles back in the same guttural dialect. Sava responds, posture rigid, explaining or perhaps making excuses. Then, after a tense pause, the voice grants them clearance to land. As they descend, Kieran notices the planet's lush landscape, contrasting with the icy rock and barren dust worlds they've endured. Towering purple trees, shimmering lakes under pale sunlight. The atmosphere is thicker, the colors more vibrant. They settle on a landing platform carved into a cliffside, overlooking a vast forest canopy. Several armed figures wait below, each bearing the same feline characteristics as Sava, sleek physiques, pointed ears, swishing tails. He tenses, uncertain of the welcome. Stepping off the ramp, Sava leads the way. The alien warriors eye Kieran with open suspicion. One steps forward, speaking harshly in their language. Sava replies in a cold tone, gesturing to Kieran. He stays silent, letting her handle it. Eventually the warrior waves them on, though the scorn in his gaze is evident. They move into a labyrinth of stone corridors carved into the cliff. Bioluminescent, vines hang from the walls, casting eerie glowing patterns. Everywhere they go, Kieran feels eyes on him. They arrive at a grand chamber, part war room, part throne room. A tall figure, draped in ornate black garments, stands by a central table, displaying a holographic map. This must be one of their leaders. Sava steps forward, bowing her head. She speaks in low, tense words. The leader's expression remains impassive, occasionally casting critical looks at Kieran. After a long exchange, the leader finally nods, motioning for them to rise. Sava turns to Kieran, voice subdued. She wants to know why you're here. He raises an eyebrow. Don't have a better story? Sava's tail flicks, clearly irritated. Tell the truth or lie. Either way, do it convincingly. He steps forward, meeting the leader's golden-eyed gaze. I came with Sava by necessity at first, he says, but we've fought side by side and I owe her my life as she owes me hers. I have no quarrel with your people unless you force one on me. He remains still, letting them study him. A moment of tense silence passes before the leader speaks again, this time in a measured accent of Kieran's language. We do not trust outsiders. The voice is sharp. But Savariel has proven her loyalty. If she vouches for you, we will tolerate your presence. Know that if you break this trust, your life is forfeit. Kieran inclines his head. Understood. They are dismissed into an adjacent corridor. Sava leads him to a small alcove where he can rest. The room is Spartan, just a pallet, some woven mats, and a small bathing chamber. She turns to leave, then hesitates, lingering in the doorway. You didn't have to come, she says, voice quiet. He shrugs, removing his battered gloves. I had nowhere else to be. She nods once, then slips out, tail swaying behind her. Hours pass. Kieran washes off the grime in a small pool fed by an underground spring, the water surprisingly warm. He tries to clear his mind, but images of Sava plague him. Memories of their clashes, their desperate escapes, and that heated moment in the station corridor swirl together. He wonders if this is just another fleeting alliance or something more. Once clean, he sits on the pallet, looking at the carved patterns in the stone walls. Sava arrives silent as a shadow. She closes the door behind her, resting against it. He can tell by her posture that she's tense, conflicted. "They want to test your abilities," she says simply. "They think humans are weak or cunning, or both. They'll want proof you can fight under their command." He stands, crossing to her. "And if I refuse?" She smirks wryly. "They'll likely kill you or send you drifting into space. Neither of us wants that, right?" He nods, letting out a slow breath. "I'll do what I must." She steps closer, eyes wandering over his still damp hair and fresh bandages. Her voice softens. "That's not the only reason I came." He waits. She lifts a hand, pressing it lightly against his chest. "We never finished what we started," she says, an undercurrent of tension in her words. His heart thuds. "We're in your people's stronghold," he counters, but there's no real protest in his tone. A trace of a smile curves her lips. "My people can wait." Their kiss ignites again, this time in the hush of the stone-walled room. The stillness outside seems to magnify every breath, every brush of skin. She pushes him back against the wall, nails grazing his arms. He slides his hands along her waist, feeling the toned muscles flex under her suit. In the subdued glow of the bioluminescent vines, they lose themselves in each other's warmth. Every touch is demanding, every gasp a stifled cry, as they each grapple for a taste of control. The tension of conflict bleeds into this intimacy, an unspoken competition to see who can unravel the other first. When it's over, they stand in the dimness, foreheads pressed together, breathing raggedly. She huffs a faint laugh. "I think you scratched me," she murmurs, half accusatory. He smirks. "You clawed me first." A beat of silence. Then, they share a wry grin. Underneath the rough edges and harsh words, there's something raw and undeniable. Neither has words for it, nor do they seek them. In their shared exhaustion, they sink onto the pallet, curling into the quiet darkness. For the first time in what feels like forever, Kieran's mind is still. Morning in this alien stronghold arrives with shifting lights in the corridors. The leader has arranged a demonstration of skill, it seems. Kieran is escorted to a circular arena carved into the stone, ringed by spectators. Sava stands off to one side, her expression unreadable. The leader speaks in their language, introducing Kieran to a tall alien warrior with sinewy arms and a coiling tail. A hush falls over the gathering. Kieran realizes with a jolt that they expect a challenge, combat to prove his worth. He strips off his jacket, stepping forward in worn battle attire. The alien warrior circles, tail lashing, lip curled. Kieran tenses, scanning for an opening. There's no weapon but a short blade provided to each. A slight nod from the leader, and the duel begins. The alien leaps first, swiping in a blur of speed. Kieran dodges, reflexes honed from countless battles. The crowd hisses in surprise when he counters with a swift slash that draws a thin line of blood across the alien's arm. The warrior snarls, bounding back, eyes bright with challenge. They trade blows, the ring echoing with the clash of steel. The alien tries to leverage superior agility, flipping over Kieran's head. But Kieran anticipates the move, striking upward, forcing the alien to twist mid-air and land awkwardly. A ripple of approval moves through the crowd. The warrior lunges again, hooking Kieran's leg, nearly toppling him. He recovers at the last second, hooking an arm around the alien's neck, but the alien slips free. This back and forth continues, in a blur of sweat and muscle. Each near hit or narrow dodge draws murmurs from the onlookers. Sava watches intently, tail coiled around her waist. When Kieran stumbles, she tenses, but he regains his footing, driving the warrior back with a series of quick strikes. Finally, he locks blades with the alien, pressing forward with grim determination. The alien's eyes widen, perhaps not expecting such raw strength from a human. With a final shove, Kieran disarms him, sending the blade clattering. He pins the alien's arm, blade poised at his throat. Silence falls. The leader nods, signaling the end. Kieran steps back, returning the blade. The alien warrior stands, pride bruised, but not mortally wounded. A hush, then a wave of low murmurs among the watchers. Sava steps forward, the barest trace of a proud smirk flickering across her lips. The leader addresses Kieran in halting human speech. "You have proven skill. We accept your presence for now." Kieran bows his head politely, catching Sava's gaze. The crowd disperses, though some remain to gawk at the human who bested one of their fighters. Sava beckons him. He follows her down a corridor leading to an alcove where the city overlooks a vast alien jungle. She stops by a parapet, looking out at the shimmering canopy. He comes up behind her, still catching his breath. She doesn't turn as she speaks. "You impress them, that's not easy to do." He leans against the parapet, glancing sidelong at her. "Thanks. You didn't look too worried." Her expression softens. "I knew you'd hold your own." A pause, then she speaks more quietly. "They'll want you to join our campaigns, to fight alongside us in our expansions. It's how we gain trust among each other, shared combat." Kieran exhales, remembering how he once fought solely for revenge. Now the idea of plunging into another war for a new cause makes him uneasy. "I'm not sure I want that. Holt is gone. I just want—" He trails off, unsure of the rest. She looks at him finally, eyes searching. "I told you before, I'm not a diplomat. I only know war. But that doesn't mean we can't choose something else." He meets her gaze, feeling that familiar pull, stronger now. "What are you suggesting?" She leans closer, placing a hand on his arm. Her voice drops to a near whisper. "I think we should find out. Away from here, away from more battles." He blinks, surprised. "But these are your people. You have a position here." She inclines her head. "I do, and I'll be back. But there's more to the galaxy than these strongholds." For a moment he thinks about his entire life, once defined by vengeance. Now that it's over, a yawning chasm awaits. Maybe leaving with Sava is the kind of new beginning he needs. She gives him a moment to reflect, then says, "If you stay, you'll be dragged into their wars, forced to prove yourself again and again. If you come with me, we can discover what's beyond the next horizon." The idea pulses in his chest, a thrilling mixture of fear and anticipation. "Where would we even go?" he asks quietly. She smiles, a genuine curve of her lips that transforms her predatory features. "Anywhere," she answers simply. "Anywhere we can breathe free." He looks out over the alien jungle, the sun setting in brilliant hues that reflect off massive leaves. The wind carries exotic scents, tinged with possibility. He glances back at her. "All right," he says at last, voice steady. "Let's get off this rock." That night they make their plans in hushed tones. Sava quietly arranges to refuel the ship, gather supplies. Kieran helps her avoid the prying eyes of the other warriors, slipping through the labyrinth of corridors. There's no dramatic farewell or official departure. They simply finalize what they need, and before dawn they return to the platform where their ship is docked. The air is cool, the sky a pale indigo as the alien sun rises. At the ramp, Sava pauses, tail swishing. She glances back at the silent fortress. This is her home, her people. Kieran waits, not rushing her. Finally, she exhales. "I'll come back one day," she murmurs, almost to herself. Then she strides into the ship, Kieran following. The engines hum to life. They lift off, leaving the fortress behind, arcs of morning light reflecting off the hull. They soar into the atmosphere, breaking the clouds in a burst of speed. Kieran shoulders his rifle in the cockpit, scanning the readouts. Sava's hands dance over controls, calm and confident. Once they breach the planet's gravity well, he glances over at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She meets his gaze, returning the smile with a knowing nod. "Coordinates?" she asks. He shrugs, the weight of possibility pressing on his chest. "Surprise me?" She chuckles softly, inputting random coordinates into the nav system. The stars shift as the ship powers up for another jump. Before engaging, she turns to him. "Why aren't you scared, human?" she murmurs, echoing the question from their first encounter. He offers a slow, steady exhale. "Maybe I've found something more compelling than fear." She leans in, capturing his lips with hers in a kiss that's both reassurance and promise. The FTL drive engages, and they vanish into star-lined corridors of space, leaving the planet and the ghosts of their old lives behind. For the E. First time in as long as he can remember, Kieran doesn't feel the crushing weight of rage or regret. There's only the thrum of the engines, the warmth of her body, and the promise of new horizons. Whatever battles or alliances lie ahead, they'll face them together, an unbreakable bond forged in conflict and sealed by passion. In that final, decisive moment, as the swirling cosmic colors envelop their craft, Kieran and Savariel share their quiet understanding. They're free. No more vendettas, no more prisons of destiny, just an endless sea of stars and the chance to rewrite their stories, side by side, for as long as they choose. And for now, that's more than enough.